fifth of 6 children of Dr. Robert Darwin and Susanna Darwin.
Oh, his parents had the same last name?
Yes, because they were married, Joe.
Oh, well, that explains it.
Though he would eventually come up with his own theories on the world and religion, Darwin was raised Unitarian. When he was only 8 years old, his mother died, and she had been exhibiting signs of intestinal issues. Some people think that maybe it was stomach cancer, an ulcer, we don't know. Not surprisingly, the death of his mother is seen as a major event in his life.
Yeah,
though,
especially by him.
Yeah, but to what degree that influenced him is debated. I've seen a lot of debate about what that did to him later in life. His father, Dr. Robert Darwin, was a doctor.
Medical doctor?
A medical doctor.
Okay.
And he decided that his son should follow in his footsteps and become a doctor. And he sent him to university. He sent him to the University of Edinburgh Medical School in 1825, though it became apparent pretty quick that Darwin couldn't cut it as a doctor.
Ha!
I didn't even realize the joke in there. The problem is that he considered the lectures boring, and the sight of blood made him sick.
Yeah, that's really weird. I mean, I'm not putting people down if blood makes you
Oh,
sick.
no, not at all.
Yeah. But I mean, looking at blood actually doesn't bother me in the least. What bothers me, and that's why I'm not a doctor or a surgeon, everything, is looking at things like intestines.
The things that are under the skin.
Yeah, that stuff grosses me out. Blood's fine. I can deal with blood all day
None of
long.
that grosses me out at all. So.
Really?
Well,
Yeah.
You're lucky then.
Yeah. Well, lucky?
Maybe. Well, needless to say about Darwin, obviously he sort of slacked off on his studies.
Yeah.
Luckily for us, he took an interest in what at the time was called the natural histories. And while he was at university, he was in a student group that studied in the field, and he really quite enjoyed it. His father, on the other hand, wasn't too amused.
Well.
He decided, Dr. Robert Darwin, that is, that if his son couldn't be a doctor, then he should be a parson, which is a priest.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they don't have priests in Unitarianism, do they?
No. I don't believe that's.
No, they
I
don't.
believe that's why it's a parson. It's and the thing about his father is I've read conflicting accounts that because he seemed to have a lot of control over Charles Darwin's life, at least as a young man, was that he was either a very stern but caring parent or he was a bit of a tyrant. I don't know which, but he decided that since Darwin could not be a doctor, that he would send him to a different school, and he sent him to Cambridge. While he was there, he didn't really enjoy the studies to be a priest either, or a parson. So he continued to study natural histories, and it was while he was there that he published several papers on the natural histories and met quite a few people who saw the world in the ways that he was developing to see it. Those papers that Darwin wrote kind of helped pave the way for him to be selected as the naturalist aboard the HMS Beagle, which we touched on briefly before. The Beagle was captained by a man named Robert Fitzroy, and Fitzroy was planning to take the Beagle out for a second voyage. The first voyage of the Beagle, which lasted from 1826 to 1830, had surveyed Patagonia and Tierra del Fuego. Fitzroy wasn't initially the captain of the Beagle, but through a series of events, he became the captain, and he managed to secure funding for a second voyage to do more surveys of the world. And one of the things that he wanted is he knew he needed a geologist, and he kind of wanted a naturalist, but he also, it seems like, kind of wanted somebody else to talk to, because it turns out being the captain of the ship can be a bit lonely.
Yeah, I bet.
Which, that worked out for him because Fitzroy reached out to a number of people that he knew trying to find someone, and the second person that was suggested to him was a young Charles Darwin. He did select Darwin, and Darwin got to go on what ended up being a 5-year voyage. I want people to understand, however, that it wasn't as if he just got to take this trip for free. He had to pay for his own way, so he was constantly writing to his family or his father primarily for money, and he also needed to pay for his room and board and food.
Couldn't he just like wash dishes or something like that?
I don't think that would have cut it. The other thing is that it wasn't as if he got some giant palatial stateroom on the ship. He was in the map room, or the chart room, excuse me. That would be a room that was 9 feet by 11 feet wide, about 5 feet high, and it had both the mizzenmast running through it and a chart table in the middle, which was 4 foot by 6 foot.
Sounds like my accommodations when I worked on a ship. Yeah.
Actually,
Sounds like a couple of apartments I've had.
Yeah.
yeah, 9 by 11 actually by ship standards, especially old-timey ships like that, it's actually pretty spacious.
Except for the fact there was that giant table in the middle
Yeah,
of it.
well.
Yeah.
You know, that sort of ate up a bunch of room.
Or also
Yeah.
maybe the fact that other people probably needed access to said chart.
That's the problem.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
It's not exactly a private room.
Yeah, you're
The-
sleeping
the-
and they roll you off the table so they can use it.
The one thing that I saw that was probably the giant luxury is there was a bathroom in there.
Okay.
It had its own bathroom.
That's nice for him.
Yeah.
Yes, so that probably worked out for Darwin, knowing how well he traveled by sea.
You kind of needed a toilet nearby.
Yeah.
It did. So the Beagle did go set off on its second voyage, and that voyage, which again I said had lasted for 5 years, traveled southwest from England. It traveled to South America, then down around the southern tip of South America, eventually making its way to the Galapagos and Australia, South Africa. I'm just going to put another South America in there, which there is because it went from South Africa to South America before then returning home to England. So quite a long voyage.
That is. I mean, I'm kind of surprised that they were at South Africa. Why they didn't just sail up north in the Atlantic?
Maybe they didn't want to do the Horn. Maybe that seemed even more dangerous.
No, they had to go around the Horn.
They did?
the Horn of Africa.
Yeah, because
Did
they
they go
went
all the way around?
underneath, went up, and then across to South America again. So they literally did a full navigation of the globe before heading north again.
Oh, okay.
And there's a number of reasons. There was a bunch of stuff they were looking at and trying to figure out, but that's the route that they took.
Okay.
All right, whatever.
As much as I'd like to go into details on that trip, I can't. We just don't have the time. That would be a show that would be hours and hours and hours long.
Yeah.
And would be well worth it, but that's not our focus today.
And we don't consider it an unsolved mystery.
No. I do want people to understand, though. I didn't really know this as a kid when I was growing up and learning about Darwin. It's not as if he went on this voyage and then immediately turned around and penned his theories of natural selection.
Yeah, he saw finch, right? Well, and then he was like, "Oh, I get it now." That's not how that happened.
No, that's not how that happened.
Yeah, he was actually sitting under a tree and an apple fell
Nope,
on his head.
That's
wrong
the wrong guy,
scientist.
too.
I know.
Wrong guy.
No. It took Darwin. He didn't publish on the origin of species till 20 years after. It took him 8 years to write the book, but he didn't publish it till 20 years later, so it's not as if it was an immediate turnaround like we were saying.
Yeah, although there are probably a lot of political reasons that he wouldn't have released it even after 8 years.
There is a lot of political or religious reasons, and there's a lot of good stuff out there about that goes into, his conflict with religion, and his wife was very religious and his struggles with that. There's a lot of great content about that. On the Origin of Species was not the only thing that Darwin wrote. He wrote gads of papers and books. I mean, the guy really was prolific. And he made a lot of very systematic observations of the world and put it all into writing.
By the way, was he capable of sketching? Did he sketch animals that he saw?
There are sketches, but to be honest, I never looked to see if the sketches were attributed directly to Darwin. I imagine there are some, but a lot of the stuff that I find wasn't direct Darwin books. They would be more a little kind of a compilation. The stuff I saw was, it was all his writings. I was reading the Beagle journals, but it didn't have many illustrations, but there were some illustrations, and he appears he did some of them, but I don't know how much of it he actually did himself.
I think he did a lot of them.
Well, I'm sure he had to, But to what degree those are published in his work, I'm not sure, because he worked with some other people on some of this stuff, and I honestly am not sure.
Yeah, he would have had. It's not as though he had an illustrator with him.
Correct.
So he would have had to draw the observations, and to the degree that they were different subtleties, which is what he observed, they would have to be detailed enough to describe that, I think.
And it may have well be that, later on he had somebody do a better job of it than
Totally
he
possible,
could
yeah.
within his capabilities. The sad part, as I'm sure you all know, is at this point we have to talk about the fact that eventually Charles Darwin did die.
What? He's human?
Yeah, he is a human.
Mortality!
On April
for us.
on April 8th, the 19th of 1882, sadly Charles Darwin did pass away. He was 73 years old. He died of heart failure at his home, Down House. He was with his family. His wife Emma was there. His daughter Henrietta, who was his 4th child, and his son Francis, who was his 7th child, were there with him. It wasn't originally the plan, but Darwin did end up being buried at Westminster Abbey. So he is near, who is it? It's Isaac Newton.
So a guy who an apple fell on his head.
Yes.
Yeah.
That guy.
And John Herschel. So he's near some very, very influential people. That obviously is a rather brief overview of Darwin himself. As I said before, please go out and do more reading on him. You will not be sorry for it. But we do need to go to our topic at this point, which is his health. Darwin suffered a huge range of symptoms through his entire life. One of the things that everybody knows, and we've talked about a little bit, is his seasickness. But that wasn't the only thing that he suffered. I mean, while he was on the Beagle, he was extremely ill, and he was nearly capacitated every time he went to sea. But it wasn't as if he was at sea for the entire 5 years. The ship was actually at sea for a total of 18 months. The rest of the time, he was on land.
Stopped. Interesting.
They were at places. They were doing observations.
Hiking around and seeing stuff.
Yeah, they'd spend a month or so in location. Sometimes it's a day or two, but a lot of time they'd spend weeks or months at places. So he didn't have to be on the boat the whole time, luckily for him.
Yeah.
That seasickness or motion sickness did follow him for the rest of his life. When he was an older man, he actually wouldn't ride in carriages because the motion of the carriage made him ill. So he refused to take a carriage. He'd walk or ride a horse.
So he invented the precursor to car sickness.
I don't know if he invented it, but he certainly suffered from it.
Yeah.
So let's go through the list of things that Darwin wrote about, reported, suffered from.
If you're a hypochondriac, just fast forward through this part.
Yeah, really.
I read it and I was like, I don't want to do this episode anymore because I think I'm gonna have all of the things that we talk about now.
I have Charles Darwin syndrome.
I have the Darwin syndrome.
I kept self-analyzing as I was going through this list. Okay, well, let's start at the top. We already talked about the vomiting and faintness at the sight of blood, which isn't necessarily a physical illness.
Yeah, I would say it's maybe not a symptom.
But here is the actual list of symptoms. Vomiting, memory loss, malaise, which is generally feeling sick, tiredness, skin problems, as in eczema and blisters, vertigo, loss of consciousness, cramps, indigestion and gas. I love this. He described it as making airs.
Technically what he's doing.
He is. Let's see. We've got dizziness, headaches, fainting, hysteria and fits of crying. He's got a rapid heartbeat and heart palpitations. Tachycardia, yep. Insomnia, vision problems, muscle spasms, memory loss, depression, feelings of impending death. I think I said memory loss twice. I must be losing memory.
You did have it in there twice.
Yeah.
Could you imagine going to your doctor with this list?
Yeah. I mean, no.
I'm sure he did go to his doctor with this list.
Yeah.
I mean, as a whole, I'm sure he went with little bits and pieces, but could you imagine taking that as one giant list?
Wasn't in terms of memory loss, wasn't it some of it more like lost time?
Blackouts, you mean?
Yeah, wasn't that some of it as well?
Yeah,
so that could account
but he
for
did have times where he was like short bouts of, it wasn't quite dementia,
Maybe
Like senility
amnesia.
or-
but yeah, kind of almost amnesic bouts.
Sure, but he also did lose time, right? That was also a thing. Okay, I just wanted to clarify because I had heard that in the list, so I wanted to make sure. Or not in the list, but in the research, so I just wanted to add it to the list. Sorry.
Yeah, no.
It's important for my theories, okay?
Okay, yeah, because this is definitely just a bullet point.
Yeah.
We're now going to go finally into theories.
Boy.
There are 40 theories.
No, we're not
Yeah.
doing 40.
We're
No,
we're
hell
not
no.
doing
Everybody, all of our listeners were just like, yes! No,
Yeah,
we're not
no,
doing that.
We're going to go with about, what,
I think
3 or
there's
4
about a half
sexy-
dozen or so. But no, I've picked out some. There's been a lot of them. Some of the older ones have really been disproven, but some of them are all over the map. So we're just going to go with kind of a short list. One thing I am going to address early on with these theories is Darwin was not healthy for most of his life. Not only as an adult, but as a child, he wasn't extremely healthy. He had some things going on. And a lot of these theories will focus on Darwin from the day he stepped on the HMS Beagle forward. So that's something that I want to bring up so everybody knows. There are a couple that we'll talk about specifically, but that's kind of a general concern that I've had with most of the theories that are out there. Theory number 1, cyclic vomiting syndrome, also known as CVS.
Cool.
Yeah, so the medical science doesn't really know what causes CVS. What they do know is that the symptoms, which a lot of these theories, we're going to talk a lot about symptoms. Those symptoms include vomiting, nausea, headaches, migraines, and occasionally abdominal pain. I did some reading and this is so bad, but people who suffer from this can have up to a dozen episodes an hour.
Ew.
That's a lot of barfing.
That sounds awful.
Yeah, not fun at all.
No.
The other thing that kind of corroborates this is that people who suffer from CVS also have issues with motion sickness, and these attacks can be brought on, the attacks of vomiting can be brought on from both positive and negative stimulus, emotional stimulus. So, yay, I'm so happy, or the
So
exact
happy I
opposite.
grew up, yeah.
Yeah, maybe that's where that statement came from.
Yeah.
I gotta see Darwin at his wedding. Darwin,
Okay, we're
Darwin
gonna
at his mother's
No.
funeral.
Right now, no more,
No more.
fake throwing up
No.
noises.
All right.
It's not
done.
happening.
Yeah.
So we've talked about this, but Darwin was prone to being sick and ill and losing his stomach, and not just from seasickness, but there was also psychological and social stressors that would set him off.
Sure.
He was known, as he put it, to be knocked down by his attacks, and that could last anywhere from hours to days to weeks. That actually seems to be part of what may have delayed the being knocked down, him being so ill for such lengths of time is part of what delayed a lot of his writing, because it would take him years and years to write things, and yet he would lose months and months of time to being so ill.
Right.
To cope for what appears to have been some of that psychological stressor, one of the things Darwin did, which is this kind of genius and kind of creepy hermit old man, is he put mirrors in places in his house so he could see who was in the room before he walked into it, so that if it was a guest that he didn't want to interact with, he was worried that it was going to set him off, he could just about face and walk away.
Nice.
Clever.
They'd never know. Oh, so-and-so's in the parlor. I'm just going to go back upstairs. The major problem with this particular theory is that CVS primarily appears in children between the ages of 3 and 7.
I don't know that that's... I mean, you literally just not 5 minutes ago said, well, the problem with most of these theories is it doesn't address the fact that Darwin was sick most of his life.
You're right.
That's
But
true.
I didn't see anything that said that Darwin was suffering from, as a child, bouts of throwing up every hour on the hour for multiple times as a child.
I guess,
And
do we know, is CVS the sort of thing that gets progressively worse? Like, could it have been that the onset, he was just like kind of throwing up every once in a while and they thought, oh, he just has a weak stomach?
you know,
It's
I can't find a lot about Darwin as a child other than kind of some general statements, and that's probably because his father didn't, sit down and write down. Little Charles got ill multiple times today because he was probably at work.
Yeah.
There's not a whole lot of that. And I do understand that there's kind of that funny division between this one actually talks about him as what could be a child, except that it sounds so extreme.
Sure, yeah.
That I can't see someone who had, and maybe he didn't have it that bad. Maybe it wasn't that he was, prone to being ill multiple times an hour continually as some people that have this extremely bad do. I'm not positive on that, but it just from the way that it was described in the journals and stuff that I read about it, it sounded to me like it was so debilitating that you couldn't do anything. And I didn't see a lot read a lot when Darwin was on land, and say in the Beagle. I didn't see a whole lot where suddenly Darwin was on land. It was always, yay, I'm so happy on land, not, yay, I'm so happy on land. I've been incapacitated for 2 days because I've been so ill, just like I was when I was on the ship.
Yeah.
So that's why I question it, because it's almost like a gap, if that makes sense, in the illness.
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't know. This is me shrugging my shoulders. I'm not sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
So let's throw that one out. Plenty of other ones.
There are others, and I don't know if we'll throw that out, but we will go on to our next theory. The next theory says that Charles Darwin had Crohn's disease. Do either of you know much about Crohn's?
Yeah, I knew somebody who had Crohn's.
I have several friends that have it.
I know a few people too.
It's a really, I feel for people who have Crohn's, because it's not a good thing.
Yeah, it's one woman that I know had to get an operation. They took part of her colon out.
Yeah, that does happen. There's a host of treatments for it today that for people who had it before, there weren't.
Yeah, and unfortunately, I think that it's not guaranteed that it's not going to come back, even though they took out the unhealthy part of her colon.
That's true, and let's talk about Crohn's, because that will kind of help explain some of why.
Yeah.
If you don't know, Crohn's is an inflammatory bowel disease. It can affect the digestive system anywhere from the beginning, which would be the mouth, to the end, the anus. So the whole way through. We don't know what causes Crohn's exactly. There's thoughts that it could be an autoimmune disease, or maybe it's just an immune system overreaction. It could be a genetic defect, or it could be caused by environmental factors like diet and microbes that enter your system. I mean, I don't know.